Welcome to this podcast is making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This episode 178. Today's guest was a popular VJ and much music. She studied improv at the iconic Second City in Toronto. You know her from Material World, The Carey Show, Nash Bridges, Star Trek, Voyager. And of course, she played Donna Chang in the season 6 Seinfeld episode, The Chinese Woman. Please welcome Angela Dohrmann. Angela, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Angela, welcome to the program. Take us back 30 years ago, October of 94. Yeah. The Chinese Woman aired on NBC. 29 million people watched that episode. A classic, obviously.
How many did?
29 million.
With the initial airing?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Back then, Seinfeld averaged about 30 million from, season 5 on.
Wow. I never considered that. That's incredible.
Times have changed. Meanwhile, Curb Your Enthusiasm, for instance, is averaging 400,000 an episode. So
but to me, we were talking about earlier water cooler shows. That is our water. That's our, what seems to me, and with demographics for me, you bring up Curb Your Enthusiasm, and it's sparky, it's a sparky show, despite the numbers.
I do agree. But be that as it may, the number of that Chinese woman, unbelievable. So take us back. How'd that role come about? Was there an audition process? What do you remember? Such an iconic role, Donna Chang.
It was a barbaric audition process. They couldn't make up their mind. And it, you're excited that you're being called back again and again and again. But, after the second time, they become apologetic, but they want to see you again. What are you going to say? No, you're excited that you're still in the running. But after that, it gets to the point where it's a bit cruel, and I've done the same scene. Like, I'm not going to discover anything new unless you get me with Jerry. We're not going to discover anything. You've seen my take. You'd have to ask the writers, but I think they could have gone a completely different way because it's a visual joke. It's a so not only you casting an actor to embody whatever you've written, but it has to be that initial joke. I'm Donna Chang really depends on the visual more so than a lot of others. So I try to be forgiving because of that, but it was grueling. It was awful.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. We've heard both sides of that. Some guest stars tell us they make the decision like that day and they start taping.
Nice.
And then others have.
They couldn't make up their mind. So this is very interesting because when one auditions, you never get the full script. That's a pilot. You might get the script, but you get, even if you're top guest spot, you get the sides they want you to read. And you can surmise with 3 scenes where this is going. It's not a 3-hour Pinter play. It's a 20-minute episodic, and you already know the characters. So you make a lot of assumptions, and usually they're right. And I did not assume, and if you looked at just what I got from the sides, I never really assumed that Jerry and I were a number. So I never, went in being like, oh, I'm his girlfriend. It was more like I was so much more into my Chinese things than any guy. Like, that's what I was a little myopic. That was kind of the joke. And so they cast it so late that I remember working the next night. And when you're working and you're like, okay, I'm up for this thing. Can anybody work for me? And they're still like, am I working for you or not? I'm like, I don't know. They called me in again, and they had already started rehearsing and blocking. So I got a call. Oh, I remember that next morning I realized, well, I haven't heard from my manager. Release this. And I was, upset. And I went for a jog. And I tried to just get it out. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to just release this one. And then I took a shower, and I got out of the shower, and the phone was ringing. And this is way before, any of our phones now. And I remember my manager was pissed. She's like, where have you been? They want you on set. I'm like, I've been trying to release this, just like get there. So when you get there, you don't have time to even read the script. And they hand me the script and they're telling me the blocking because they've already blocked it. They don't have time. And the next run through, and I'm just writing down my blocking, and then I've got lunch. And so they say, okay, we've got a network run through after lunch. And a network run through is when guest stars get recast. You get the acts. That's the first network run through is when people are like, can we, great. And then you might get a call from your manager saying they love you, but they're going to go, exit the set. And so for a guest star, you're always very like, oh, I have time just to read the script before network run through and memorize this blocking that I didn't find in rehearsal myself. And I'm reading, I'm like, oh my God, I'm his girlfriend. I've been playing this, like, even with Jerry, when we were blocking, I'm playing it like, I'm like Julia Louis-Dreyfus, I'm his pal. And I'm like, oh man, I've got to, I hope he didn't think those choices I made just roughly were what I was. So I made some different choices and had to adjust, in my dressing room before network run through. And obviously I didn't get cut after that network run through. So
yeah, it all worked out. And to your point, I think, and that's a crazy story because it seemed like you were kind of just whisked in there and just running with it as you went. So, all your training, I guess, paid off there too, as well. But it's interesting because as you mentioned, your scenes are, you're his girlfriend, but you can tell that you're kind of more you're more there to push George's story almost, even though you're Jerry's girlfriend,
yes.
right? So that is interesting because a lot of your stuff had to do with one of the best scenes. I mean, you're in two iconic scenes, in my opinion. We'll get there, but the first one, when you break the news to George, that his parents are getting divorced. I remember watching that live the first time, and he just turns the oven on and gets down.
So good in that. I mean, those actors, though, they're the meat, and and the writing. But yeah, I was very fortunate at the time. Of course, I didn't think in 30 years I'd be, still people would be interested in this gig. It was a gig, and I think it lasted 4 days. So yeah, that's a testimony to the actual show.
Yeah, but it's a testament to you. I mean, there's certain characters, certain episodes that just resonate and people remember, and the Chinese woman is one of them. And boy, did you do a great job. And it's funny, the whole thing happened because of the lines got crossed. And I was thinking about this, pre-cell phone. I don't really remember lines even getting crossed back in the day. Was that even a thing? But
yes, it was a thing.
But they made it a thing, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it happened. It happened.
Yeah, it definitely happened. I remember it happening once or twice. For sure.
Yeah, and it was a little dangerous. It was like, oh my God, especially I was like at home and a preteen and really into being on the phone. And the fact that was like getting hacked or something,
Yeah, good old landlines. We do miss them. So yeah, then you ask out Jerry, obviously, in that first scene. The first scene's kind of you're on the phone with him, but then the first scene at the actual Chinese restaurant, Jerry's all giddy, the Pacific Rim, all these kind of jokes.
That's a great line.
And then he sees you, and did you think I was Chinese? So yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Your introduction, obviously, just you and Jerry at that Chinese restaurant was such a funny scene, and obviously Changstein, the whole thing.
Yeah.
How was it working with Jerry? Obviously, we'll get to it. You kind of worked with all the characters on the show, but that obviously the connection with Jerry, there's obviously some good chemistry there. Love that first scene. Tell us a little bit about Jerry in general in that first scene. What do you remember?
Well, I got to be honest with you. There wasn't chemistry. I don't think there's any chemistry between Jerry Seinfeld and Angela Dohrmann. It was my job that's what I meant by I was making choices based on the reality of us and my thinking that I was his pal, right? And so you need to act chemistry. That's part of what, I'm his love interest. This is a date. You make different choices. I mean, the difference in your body. And so, no, I don't think I bet Jerry doesn't even, probably because it was recorded, but when you're a guest star, it's like remembering some ice cream flavor you had 3 summers ago. I mean, they're into what was it, the 4th season? How many girlfriends did he have before? So I'm glad you thought we did our job.
It's interesting. It was actually the 6th season, which is even crazier. It was even
Oh,
further
wow.
along.
Okay.
Yeah. But what's even funnier is your again, I mentioned the George with the head in the oven. Even more iconic probably is Estelle's line to you. I'm not taking advice for some woman from Long Island. I mean, if that's not Estelle Costanza, I don't know what is. I mean, how much fun was it working with Estelle, and Frank is there?
Oh, what a gift.
We're a sucker
all
for
of
the
them.
pants.
And they were all different actors in different ways. And also generous. Funny story with her is she's really generous also off stage. And I'm fostering a cat, so she may make an appearance. So she and I ran into each other like a couple weeks after we shot, and it was a voiceover commercial audition. And, one would be surprised at how small and fairly blah these rooms are where you're waiting, the audition holding rooms, especially when you see these people that are like, oh, wow. And we're all just sort of trying to get a job. And I would always welcome voiceover auditions because I didn't have to put makeup on. And most, women, I was quite young then, didn't really sweat that if it was just a voiceover audition. And Estelle walks in and we see each other and she says hi. We may be 5 feet across from each other in this room that's like a waiting room. She thinks she's whispering to me and she goes, just a little mascara. Just a little mascara. Like she's giving me motherly advice on how you leave your house, honey. You need a little mascara. I thought that was the best. I mean, I'm so glad I have that story.
Wonderful. What a lady, huh? What a present. I mean, and it's funny, and ever since then, all I do is, and I'm talking to you now, I'm still picturing you as a girl from Long Island. Now, I knew
you convinced us.
No, I know. I knew you.
JFK a few times. That's my association with Long Island.
I know you. Yeah. So again, you played it so well. Obviously, you grew up in Iowa, right?
I did.
Yeah. So yeah, how does a girl from Iowa end up on the set of Seinfeld? Tell us a little bit about the path there.
And it's funny that you say that because my grandfather was so Iowa, Preston, Iowa, very small town, not very worldly whatsoever. And when I got the job, and, they were my grandma and grandpa in Clinton, Iowa, and they would record with, I don't think they would record. He would get his reel to reel and record the audio of my shows because that was their way of encapsulating, like VHS, it was the big furniture TV thing. And when I got it, he goes, I love Seinfeld. I'm like, Grandpa? And I thought, absolutely nothing in common. I don't think he'd ever been to New York City. Maybe he met a handful of Jews inadvertently, going to Chicago. And so he loved it. And, comedy is comedy. And it didn't have to be set on a farm to be funny. It was just so intrinsically funny.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I think we were having this argument earlier this week, actually. People were saying you couldn't relate to it because it's New York. And we're like, no, it's not a show about New York, to your grandfather's point. It's a show about relationships, friendship.
Yeah. And they brought up Your Enthusiasm. They brought up topics that at the time, a guy wanting to date an Asian woman was a very taboo, maybe thing to admit in polite society, right? So that's always titillating to anybody that they're bringing up what they're thinking. But how did I get there? I auditioned like everybody else. I had a great manager.
Well, you're fast forward a little too much. So you went to Tulane, and obviously you had the work with Second City that obviously prepped you, and obviously your camera work, VJ stuff. Yeah, I mean, all that had to give you the confidence to be able to get on obviously one of the biggest shows of all time.
Yeah, it's funny because Tony, you mentioned that's when the training comes in. I can tend to get snobby about it because so much attention is brought to 4 days, maybe even 3.5 days of acting, that the role was not challenging. I wasn't, there was no Oscar choppy. The role, I felt the challenge for me was to remain centered, to remain just present and not be like, because that's part of the joke is to be just matter of fact, not do anything with that line. That line doesn't need anything. I had an acting teacher who would call it Jewish cooking, overacting. He'd say, it's like a bagel. You don't need to boil it and bake it. Just boil it. We'll get it. And so that part of it was like, don't bake it. Don't do anything to this. Just speak the words. And, if anything, Shakespeare's very difficult. No one wants to talk to me about my Shakespeare. But at the same time, Shakespeare and great writing, no matter how contemporary, you don't have to do a lot. The writer does so much for you that you don't have to find the funny. The funny is there. Just be present with it. I mean, it wasn't a real departure, I should say.
Yeah, and it's funny. Well, the writer of this episode, you had one of the best. Peter Melman was he wrote about 20 or so episodes. We've talked to him a couple of times on the podcast, and his episodes are, like you said, the writing is there. And it's, I mean, what you just described is what you did. I mean, I just rewatched it again, obviously before we were talking to you, and that's the first thing I thought is how you stayed in the pocket of like, what's the problem here? I'm Donna Chang. Like, what's like you didn't make it into anything more than it needed to be. And that's what it needed. Like you said, like the delivery was there, and it perplexes Jerry, and Jerry gets mad, and it all kind of stems from there. Estelle gets mad, but it's the way that you just acted. Like, this is, you didn't make it big. It's just, I'm Donna Chang.
Yeah,
like,
I wasn't defensive about it.
Right. Yeah. It's just like, this is it. And that's where the funny came in, and the way they reacted off of you, especially Estelle, obviously was amazing. But yeah, and it's interesting because Larry David makes a cameo in your episode too, as the man in the cape, as an actor. We talked about Jerry as an actor, and we even touched on a little bit of Jason. But did you have any interactions at all with Larry David on set while you were there for those 4 days? Do you remember anything?
Really, the closest interaction I had with him, which is so Larry David in retrospect, and I didn't know that until I watched Curb Your Enthusiasm. That's how little. I think we had none but this that I remember. And it was one of those grueling callbacks where it's like, and I think it may have been the last audition. I don't know. It was one of the last. Lots at stake, very few women, maybe 4, 5, I don't know, that maybe not even that. And I go in, and again, these rooms are deceptively small for what's at stake. You'd think, wow, you're in Hollywood and but the room is just, nothing. And he's on a couch and I'm maybe 4 feet from him. And I'm doing the scene with the casting director that's sitting next to him on the couch. And I came in. Oh, and I remember the first thing the casting director said was, thank you for coming in again. We're very sorry. We really appreciate you coming back. And I said, thanks for having me. And I felt an energy from this bald guy on the couch who was a bigwig, I guess, or he wouldn't be there. And I felt him, that like Beavis and Butthead, thanks for having me. I said, thanks for having me. And I felt sort of this, he didn't make a noise, but I felt this like, oh, there's somebody here who gets that as a setup. And in retrospect, I wish but I was too nervous. I just, let's do the scene. In retrospect, now that I know who he is, and I sense that I was right in sensing he saw it as a sexual joke setup, like, thanks for having me. It's like, yeah, never, or not biblically, but you can cast me. But I got that from him, and it's a very gratifying feeling now to watch his work and think, yeah, I was probably right on that.
That's a great story. Yeah. So LD, right, if you will. So this was 1994. You were pretty early in your acting career, right?
Well, and no, my career stopped in 99. So not really, maybe mid.
Okay.
Mid.
But as far as like television, we'll say, right? So what did you know? Like, were you a fan of Seinfeld? I mean, I know
Not
season
really.
6. Really?
I didn't have a TV. And it wasn't until I had kids and was just a slave to laundry, and we had a little TV in the laundry room, that I started seeing these reruns. And I'm like, oh my God, this was the funniest show. But at the time, I didn't even own a TV. I couldn't really be a fan.
Interesting. So when you went in, it was there wasn't any nerves.
Well, I knew it
per
was a
se.
big show. And, I knew it was big. I knew it was funny. I'm sure I saw a few, but I was not a fan of any show. When you don't have a TV and, you're not going to a bar to watch everything, and you don't have a laptop to watch anything in 94.
Yeah, exactly. Back then.
So I just would go off of the script.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. No, it's interesting because, I know we know you were talking about earlier too, teaching, and I know that's a big passion. That's kind of what you've been doing.
No, not really.
Well, regardless,
Just because you do it, isn't it a big passion?
I'm sure there are things from your Seinfeld experience that you do pass on though as you teach. Is there anything you took from working with these guys, these professionals, these kind of being on that set? Is there anything that you gleaned from that you kind of have taken with you throughout, your career since?
That's a great question. I think it's just what we were speaking about the impact, the 29 million people, the impact that television can have on a culture, or a mirror that, when it's reflecting right, is so very powerful for us. I mean, we are all coming from different places, and we have one common thing to talk about in a pretty passionate way. So the power that something like a good story in characters can have on people, because I've done many shows and no one wants to talk about the other ones. And that has to do, again, with the roots and strength of that show.
Yeah. It's relatability, right? You mentioned your grandfather had a special feeling towards this show.
Well, it's funny.
It's funny. And I think
funny show. He watches it every week.
And I think you're very modest. I think, you're saying it's great writing, but I think when you marry great writing with great acting, that's when the magic happens. And that's what people remember. And no, seriously, like, Seinfeld's a different, they had the four main, but this podcast was built on guest stars, and the show was built on guest stars. It's rare. Yeah. I'm looking at your other Nash Bridges, Party of Five. No one remembers the guest stars from those shows. Friends, even, no one knows. But Seinfeld, it's like, you mentioned a show, you're like, oh yeah, Donna Chang. Like, you're forever remembered because of everything we just talked about, right? The great writing, of course, but I think your delivery as well. So, it's one of those shows it resonates no matter how old you are, right? Whether I show my young kids Seinfeld and they die of laughter, right? And to your point, I remember my grandmother watching it as well. You can't say that for every show, right? So, and Donna Chang, tell us, I guess, after that was a Thursday night. Obviously, 29 million people watched it. Did things change, like recognition wise, or?
No, I mean, and I guess you shoot. I don't know when I shot that, but you shoot it and it airs another time, and you hope you remember when it airs. Often, I was waitressing, so I'm not going to lose a good shift on a Thursday night to watch it air live necessarily. And I don't remember why. I must have, though, or recorded it. But no, it was like a really great credit. I knew that going in, like, oh, great, I got to audition for Seinfeld. But I was still in the trenches. It wasn't like my life. It was 3.5 days of work. I guess if you'd asked my manager, I'm sure people picked up the phone about me more so because the approval was stamped by them.
Yeah.
Which says a lot. that they chose me. I think they have great taste.
Yeah, and listen, you're the title character, right? It was called the Chinese woman, and then you were that woman, right? I mean,
and Tony, you said something earlier, and I thought this is a credit to their sensibility. Is that character could very well have been played ditzy, very like I'm Donna Chang, like what's the big deal, Confucius, and just not altogether grounded.
Right.
And it would have played fine. And the joke may have been more on Donna Chang, but they didn't go that way, which is a tribute to them.
Yeah, it's smart writing. The show was that's kind of what Seinfeld made Seinfeld, right? I think most sitcoms would have went the route you just mentioned, especially at that time. That's like
easier,
right? Yeah, it's just easier, funnier, get the big laugh but it was more of a smarter angle of like, especially the Estelle twist was what makes it funny, because then it's like she's not taking advice from some woman from Long Island. It changes everything in her mind just because now she sees you.
About that, they were seeing lawyers. They each had lawyers.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, the whole thing was. Yeah,
they were committed. Retainers had been written, I think.
It was, and we talked to Kelly Caulfield, who was in your episode as well.
Oh, yes.
She played Noreen. And she gave us some stories around Larry David, because she was kind of in a scene with him at the end. But I don't know if you had interaction with her on set at all, or any of the other kind of guest stars. Do you remember?
I just remember Noreen. I remember she was a New York based actor, and I was like so intrigued by that. What do you do? Like, how did you get and how that worked? And for pilot season, she's like, we find couches to stay on. And so I was just talking the life of getting work with her. And you got to understand, we're out of a job in 3 days.
Right, you're there.
Not like, hey, the party, and we're like, okay, what's the next job? So that's usually what guest stars speak about, who auditions or.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, especially on a show like that. You're there for just a few days. And you mentioned a couple of times, like, from Iowa. And then you just mentioned that she was a New York actress. And we talked about you had no TV and all this kind of stuff. And I think if we did a little bit of research, is it true you hiked the entire Appalachian Trail?
I did.
That's awesome. Have you ever read A Walk in the Woods?
Oh, yeah. That's why I did it.
That's one of my favorite books. I got it up there. That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. You read the book and then you did it. Is that right?
Yeah, Bill Bryson's from Iowa. He's from my town in Iowa.
I knew he's from Iowa. I didn't know he's from your town. Holy cow! That's
wild. I used to deliver morning newspapers, the Des Moines Register, on the street where he grew up, apparently. So yeah. So
wow,
that has not been confirmed, but yeah, Bill Bryson's brilliant.
Yeah. Walk in the Woods. I also have was there one about everything in the world? What the heck's it called? It's like everything.
Yeah, I will not remember his title.
Yeah. I mean, it's so detailed, but that's
crazy. Why I didn't even know it really existed until I read that book.
I knew. Yeah, it's one of those things where you kind of hear about it, but you don't think it's actually possible, almost, right? So
yeah.
Did you do hiking other than the Appalachian Trail, like the Continental Divide? I just hiked
those other big ones? I hiked. I mean, I didn't do backpacking, but I just hiked with my son. Pretty tough hike. I'm very near the Appalachian Trail, and
interesting.
It's the Cherokee National Forest is just literally. So yeah, I read that book, and I was at like a career impasse, and I didn't know what I wanted. Do I go to grad school? I had a big disappointment on a pilot that I was cast in. And so I read that book, and I went hiking with my sister on New Year's Eve in LA. And I said, I'm hiking the AT. Fuck pilot season this year. Like, it's breaking my heart. And so I did. I hiked the AT starting April 14th of 99. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, that's commendable right there. It's one of those things where you put your mind to it and you just did it. That's one foot in front of the other, right? It's just
so painful and so uncomfortable, and you feel like an idiot. And most of the time you do question your choices, but at the same time, it's so very different from the real world. You get subjectively out of it what you put into it. No one's saying, they went with the redhead to climb the mountain.
Now you mentioned your son, Seinfeld fan?
No, neither of them. They are
Really?
so engrossed in sports. One guy's is a career in it, but
Oh, wow.
TV, and I believe I've heard this correctly, and I'm the mother, so I get it just in fits and starts. But apparently, one of my sons was in a fraternity, and when he was rushed, they have this huge screen, and they would play Donna Chang scenes over and over to torture him because it's his brother, right? And all his brothers, I don't know what kind of hijinks, but I thought, oh my God, like that bit him in the ass. So no, I don't think he's a big Seinfeld.
Oh God, what a bunch of jackasses.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, they're gonna go for the whatever his vulnerability is, which was your mom was on, like, we're gonna play this, I don't know. That's what no one's telling me the real story.
All right, from Iowa, Casey's Pizza, your favorite?
I left Iowa on my 18th birthday, and Casey's didn't exist back then. So I know the whole, Barstool Sports, the Casey's Pizza, if you see that. But that was just discovered. I don't know from Casey's Pizza, I'm afraid.
Figured how to ask.
I know
I've been to Cedar Rapids a couple times, and you got to go to Casey's. So
did you like it? You sound like you might be from a pizza place, like the heart of great pizza.
Yeah, we're from New York, New Jersey area.
Oh yeah.
New Haven.
Well, my boys were raised went to high school in Jersey. They go to school in Tennessee, and they're like, you guys don't call this pizza, right? Like, it's a different name. And they are so like, they will literally go like, you find Domino's edible? It's like, you gotta go to Jersey.
Just one more question, not kind of off Seinfeld for a second. I'm interested because much music I remember back in the 90s was a big thing. I kind of catch clips of it a lot. Like how fun was that? It looked like it was a lot of fun being around that sort of scene in that time where people were just like, it was a different time. People younger than us probably don't really get what that was like.
But you don't know it's a different time.
Right. Obviously not. You're in it. But yeah, exactly. But
I knew I was incredibly blessed to have that job. And I, again, like with the Seinfeld thing, to remain centered. If I got caught up in the, wow, this is happening and this might be iconic one day, I don't know if I would have been able to do my job. But yeah, it was, and it also at the time, you don't think it's going to stop. You don't think videos are a new thing. Videos are going to go out? What do you mean?
Yeah, you've certainly been a part of, some iconic initiatives, if you will. I think that show, obviously Second City, everything you've done has been just remarkable in your career. So we can't thank you enough. Obviously, we're loyal Seinfeld fans here, and Donna Chang will forever live in Seinfeld lore. I know you're modest about it, but just an incredible performance. You're in 5 scenes. I mean, that's incredible. No guest stars in 5 scenes.
Yeah.
You played it great. From Ridiculous to The Lines Crossed, everything else. Just remarkable work, and glad to see you're still doing great. And for those on audio, she looks exactly the same, folks. It's unbelievable 30 years later.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great, Angela.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right.
Have a great night.
Bye.